Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our E101 webinar series. If you'll join, keep your mute button on, and then also close down your video if you can. We'd like to just highlight the presenters today. Welcome. Glad you could make it here with us today. And my name is Jennifer Collins. I am the manager of the Pollution Prevention and Compliance Assistance Group at IDEM. And it is our pleasure to provide these webinar series for you and to provide some insight on regulatory areas and to just give some general background knowledge on various topics. And today we have the NPDES Permit Program overview. That is the National Pollutant Discharge Effluent system. I'm so sorry. Charles, correct? Elimination system. So sorry. My brain went blank there for a second. And obviously I'm not the expert on this. My background's in air quality. So I have invited two of my staff here today to share this information with you, and I will introduce them now. And just as a reminder, if you have questions that you'd like answered during today's event, please do enter those into the chat function. We will be addressing questions towards the end of the event, and hopefully we can get those answers for you. If we do not have them at the time of this program, we can get them for you. We'd be happy to follow up with you on those questions. We also will be providing you a certificate of attendance for today's event, and that is, it will provide you a certificate as well as the agenda, so that you, if you are a CHMM or a have a professional engineer license, then you can turn that into your licensing or credential agency for credits. We did not apply for CEUs for wastewater or drinking water. We just had a short turnaround time, and that wasn't available for us at that time. So once again, please turn off your cameras, mute yourselves, enter your questions into the chat function. And I'd like to introduce Charles Breitenfeld. He also goes by Chuck. He has served as a senior environmental manager for the Indiana Department of Environmental Management Compliance and Technical Assistance Program since October 2016. He also serves as the program manager up in the Northwest office for the Indiana Partners for Clean Air program. He has spent his time at IDEM building relationships with the regulated community in the Northwest Indiana area. He's developing their trust and just serving them in all the regulatory areas that we manage, a multimedia focus with CTAP Group. He grew up in a town of 800 in central Wisconsin, and he graduated from Northland College in Ashland, Wisconsin in 2009, and he has a degree in meteorology and business with a minor in physics. And he spends his spare time as a 5-sport official in the state of Indiana, IHSAA, and I know he will be very busy this coming weekend with some softball games, so that's exciting. We also have Heath Dill, who is actually our Senior Environmental Manager in the Southwest Regional Office for IDEM, and he does also serve the Compliance and Technical Assistance Program. He has maintained his class 4 municipal and Class D industrial wastewater operator certifications, as well as a Class 3 collection systems operator certification. He was the owner and operator of DES Water Solutions from 2006 to 2011, and the laboratory manager of the Newburgh Wastewater Treatment Facility from 2008 to 2017. In mid-January of 2017, he came to the IDEM Office of Water Quality, where he served as a wastewater inspector. And in April of 2019, he was promoted into his current position with CTAP. He's been a longtime member of the IWEA group and has been on the laboratory and O&M committees. He served as vice chair and co-chair of the lab committee twice. He's worked in auditing several laboratories for the central to southern portion of Indiana. He's got a background in environmental science and environmental economics and policy through Oregon State University. And he's currently training for some other technical things to assist us on Microsoft Dynamics platform and Power Platform certifications. He's an avid lover of nature, and in his free time he enjoys spending time with his family and taking hikes in nature preserves, the state parks, national parks, traveling, writing, meditation, reading, and doing his best to learn the art of woodworking. So we have a very great group of presenters here for you today, and I'd like to go ahead and turn that over to Chuck, and he can start off today's program. Once again, please keep your cameras off and yourself muted, and if you have any questions, please enter those into the chat, and we will make sure to address those questions at the end of the presentation. Thank you so much for being here today.
Well, thank you, Jennifer. Great introduction. I feel, Heath, that I have to beef up my bio, though. Yours is like 4 times longer than mine. So just got to say, I got to beef that up a little bit. All right, well, welcome, everybody. I see we're up over 125 people, so that's great. We're here today to talk to you about the NPDES permitting program. We're going to start by talking about the permitting program, how it got its start, and how it is administered. We're also going to go over some terms that you're going to need to know as we go about this presentation. And then we're going to get into the different types of NPDES permits that there are, along with some of the major components that make up those permits. Finally, we're going to go over the steps that it takes for you to get an NPDES permit. And then we're going to leave some time at the end of the presentation for some Q&A. So the state of Indiana's efforts to control the direct discharge of pollutants to waters of the state, they were inaugurated by the passage of the Stream Pollution Control Law that was way back in 1935. However, it was inadvertently repealed in 1941. In 1943, a similar law with the same name was promulgated once the legislature realized that they had made a mistake. The importance of this 1943 Stream Pollution Control Law is that it established the Stream Pollution Control Board, which was made up of 6 individuals, and gave the board the power and the right to order any person, corporation, municipality, partnership, legal entity to acquire, construct, repair, alter, or extend a treatment plant that may be necessary to properly dispose of or treat any organic or inorganic matter that may cause or contribute to pollution of the state's waters. This bill was amended in 1945 and expanded the bill to include 7 board members, and it served until the Federal Waters Pollution Control Act of 1948 was established. That was established to enhance the quality and value of our water resources and to establish a national policy for the prevention, control, and abatement of water pollution. This was an important step to establishing the basic legal authority that the federal regulations for water quality. This act was then amended in 1956 to strengthen some of the enforcement provisions, and then it was amended again in 1965 to establish water quality standards for surface waters, and those were both enforceable by state and federal authorities. Incremental adjustments through the early 1970s beefed up reporting requirements and enforcement provisions, and it also added the anti-degradation component. But despite all the improvements achieved by each of the amendments to this original act, it resulted in very sporadic legislation and a very hodgepodge of law that resulted in 11 reorganizations and restructurings of federal agency responsibilities, and it made implementing the laws increasingly more difficult. Then, in 1972, the Act was finally significantly reorganized and expanded to what we now more commonly call the Clean Waters Act. The 1972 amendment was enacted by Congress to address the serious pollution problems affecting our nation's rivers, lakes, and coastal waters. Specifically, Section 101A of the Clean Water Act set forth the objective to restore and maintain the chemical, physical, and biological integrity of our nation's waters. The section further identified goals necessary to achieve these objectives. There are two commonly referenced goals. Those include the goals of attaining a water quality sufficient to enable the nation's waters to be both swimmable and fishable. Now, in order to be that, those waters have to be free of decaying, rotting, or otherwise objectionable bottom deposits. They have to be free from oil, scum, and floating debris in amounts that are unsightly. There cannot be any nuisance levels of odor, color, or other conditions. There can't be any undesirable or nuisance aquatic life, or there can't be any substances in there in amounts toxic to either humans or aquatic life. The other national goal was to eliminate the discharge of pollutants into all navigable waters by 1985. Well, one of the cornerstones of the 1972 Clean Water Act was the establishment of the National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System. That program can be found in Section 402 of the Act. This is the vehicle that we currently use to control direct discharges to waters of the state. These permits place limits on the amounts of pollutants that can be discharged to waters of the state by each discharger. The limits that are set forth in these permits are set at levels that are protective to both aquatic life in the waters that receive them and protective to human health. Now, the U.S. EPA is very big and large, but it can't do everything all by itself. So it gives the states primacy. The U.S. EPA is authorized to directly implement the NPDES program, but they may, however, authorize states, territories, or tribes to implement either all or part of this national program. Currently, there are 46 states, including the state of Indiana, that have authorization from the U.S. EPA to administer their own NPDES program. There's only 4 states that don't, and those include the states of Idaho, New Mexico, New Hampshire, and Massachusetts. The state of Indiana was granted primacy from the U.S. EPA to administer their program on January 1st of 1975. This was done through an implementation of a memorandum agreement. From 1975 to 1986, the state managed the NPDES program through that Stream Pollution Control Board that was established back in 1943. They were staffed by people at the Indiana State Board of Health, and they created the Division of Water Pollution Control. Then, on April 1st, 1986, happy birthday, the Department of Environmental Management came into existence, and the responsibility of the NPDES program was transferred from the Office of Water Quality, to the Office of Water Quality, That's where it still resides today. All right. The granting of primacy was and continues to be contingent upon the states having an NPDES rules in place that are at least, let me say that again, at least as stringent as the federal rules. The Indiana NPDES program rules are predominantly found in Section 327, Indiana Administrative Code, or IAC 5. There is some help from 327 IAC 2, where the state's water quality standards are maintained. US EPA Region 5 does have oversight over Indiana's NPDES program, and their authority includes the right to review and comment on all major NPDES permits prior to issuance, and it also includes the right to review and comment on all rules adopted by the state of Indiana that pertain to the NPDES program. All right, that goes over a little bit of how the NPDES program got its start here in the state of Indiana. Now we're going to go over some definitions that you're going to need to know as we go forward throughout this presentation. First, we're going to talk about pollutant. And pollutant is broadly defined as essentially includes any type of industrial, municipal, and agricultural waste discharged into the water. In Indiana, the definition of pollutant is found in 327 IAC 5-1.5-41. The term includes items that you would commonly think of, such as garbage and sewage, but it also includes items that you might not commonly think about, and those are things like heat, sand, and rock. For regulatory purposes, pollutants have been grouped into 3 general categories under the NPDES program, and those are conventional, toxic, and non-conventional. Conventional pollutants include things like the 5-day biochemical oxygen demand. That is an indicator of the amount of oxygen in which bacteria and other microorganisms consume in water sampling during the period of 5 days to degrade the water contents aerobically. This is done at a temperature of 20 degrees Celsius or 68 degrees Fahrenheit. Other conventional pollutants might include things like total suspended solids, pH, fecal coliform, and oil and grease. Toxic pollutants is next. Those are defined in Section 307A1 of the Clean Water Act, and includes materials and man-made organic compounds. It also includes metals, and when I say metals, I'm talking about things like cadmium, copper, lead, nickel, silver, and zinc. Now those certainly aren't all the different metals, but those are certainly ones that come up very common in permits. Non-conventional pollutants are those that do not fall under either of the above 2 categories, and include things like chlorine, ammonia, nitrogen, phosphorus, chemical oxygen demand. That is an indicative measure of the amount of oxygen that can be consumed by a reaction. And the last thing, non-conventional pollutants I'd like to mention is whole effluent toxicity. Whole effluent toxicity refers to the total toxic effect to aquatic organisms from all pollutants contained in the waters in the facility's wastewater. It's also called effluent. This is called a wet test, and wet test measures wastewater's effects on specific test organisms and their ability to survive, grow, and reproduce. All right, those are different types of pollutants. Now we're going to talk about point source. Point source is a regulatory term used to describe a certain type of pathway by which pollutants can enter the water. In NPDES, they may also be called an outfall. So point source, outfall, they're the same thing. The other major type of pathway that pollutants enter the water is called a non-point source. We'll get into that in a second. In Indiana, a point source is defined in Section 327 IAC 5-1.5-40. It's defined as any discernible, confined, and discrete conveyance from which pollutants are or may be discharged. excuse me, the rule lists examples of point sources, and they're included, but certainly not limited to pipes, ditches, channels, tunnels, conduits, wells, discrete fissure, containers, rolling rock, concentrated animal feeding operations, and landfill leachate collection systems. Here's a picture of a point source here. You can see that pipe sticking out there. That's what we would commonly see as something identified as a point source. Some typical point source discharges include discharges from publicly owned treatment works. There are also discharges from industrial facilities and other discharges associated with urban runoff. While the NPDES program does apply to certain specific types of agricultural activities, such as those concentrated animal feeding operations, the majority of agricultural activities are defined as non-point source operations and are thus they're not subject to NPDES program. All right, waters is next. In Indiana, waters is defined in Indiana Code 13.11.2-265. That means the accumulation of water, surface and underground, natural and artificial, public and private, or part of the accumulations of water that are either wholly or partially within, flow through, or border upon Indiana. That's a pretty all-encompassing term. Now the term waters also includes waters of the United States, and that can be found in section 502, section 7 of that, of the Federal Clean Waters Act, more specifically 33 United States Code 1362, section 7, that are located in the state of Indiana. Now that new rule of the Clean Waters Act went into effect on June 22nd of 2020. It's about 93 pages long, so if you want to read the whole thing, please feel free. It can be found starting on page 22,250 of the Federal Register. Now the term waters is pretty all-encompassing, but however, it does not include a few things. One of them is an exempt isolated wetland. Now that is defined as associated with a man-made body of surface water, and that is of any size, created by either excavating, diking, or excavating and diking dry land to collect and retain water for or incidental to agricultural, commercial, industrial, or simply for aesthetic purposes. Other things the term water does not include are private ponds or an offstream pond, reservoir, wetland, or other facility built for the reduction or control of pollution or the cooling of water before discharge. I would like to note here that the Indiana definition of waters does differ from the federal definition of waters of the United States. An example of this is in Indiana, there is no requirement for the waters to be navigable in order to be subject to the state's jurisdiction. So that's really big. Usually in the United States, it has to be navigable. For waters of the state of Indiana, it does not have to be. All right, those are some definitions that you're going to need to know as we go forward here. We're going to talk a little bit here real quickly about the applicability of the NPDES program. At the national level, the NPDES program applies to and a permit is required for the discharge of pollutants from a point source into waters of the United States. And wait for the slide to update here. And in Indiana, the NPDES does apply for a permit and is required for discharge of pollutants from point sources into the waters of the state of Indiana as well. Specifically in Indiana, pursuant to 327 IAC 5-2-2, a discharge of pollutants from a point source into the waters of state of Indiana is prohibited unless the discharge is in conformity with a valid NPDES permit and is obtained prior to the discharge. That's a big word in this slide here, prior to. You must have that permit in hand before you start discharging. Now, of course, there are some exclusions, and there are 9 of them. There are 9 exclusions, and those are found in 327 IAC 5-2-1.8. However, even though there are 9, there are 2 that are most commonly utilized. The first one are discharges from various agricultural activities designated as non-point source activities. And those include things such as the runoff from orchards, cultivated crops, pastures, rangelands, and forest lands. And the other discharge that does not require, or the exclusion that is used, are discharges from your facility into a delegated publicly owned treatment work by your indirect dischargers. These discharges are, however, subject to pre-treatment regulations. And if you're a facility that is discharging into a publicly owned treatment works, or POTW, please check with them first to see if they are a designated facility, to see whether you're going to need an NPDES permit or a pre-treatment permit. All right, now let's get into the different types of permits that there are. Now that we have a little bit of background information, there are 2 different types of NPDES permits, basically. The first one is the individual permit, and the second one is a general permit. Let's talk about the individual permits first. An individual permit is a permit specifically tailored to an individual facility and is developed based on the information contained in the permit application. IDEM has established 3 different categories under the individual permits. Those are municipal, industrial, and wet weather permits. Let's talk about municipal permits first. Municipal permits category includes various types of facilities discharging into sanitary wastewater. Those are things like a major municipal facility. These are facilities that are owned by a municipality and designated by the US EPA as a major discharger. Typically, this designation is assigned to facilities with a design flow of greater than 1 million gallons per day or greater. So that's a big number right there. 1 million gallons per day or higher, you're a major municipal discharger. Now, a minor municipal discharger is a facility that is owned by a municipality that is not designated as the EPA as a major discharger. And they are facilities that are typically designed for flows of less than 1 million gallons. Next is semi-public. These are facilities that are not owned by a municipality, state agency, or a federal agency. These are things such as mobile home parks. Some rural subdivisions here in Northwest Indiana have these. There are schools that have them that are very rural, and also some restaurants have these as well. Next is state-owned. These are facilities that, you guessed it, are owned by a state agency. Some examples of these are like all of our state parks or our prison system. And federally owned is the last one here. Those are facilities that are owned by a federal agency. These can include things such as military installations and our national parks. All right, the next category is industrial. Industrial permits category includes various types of facilities discharging wastewater resulting from the production of a product. This includes both processed water and non-processed wastewater. There are 2 different designations in this category. The first one is major. A major discharger is designated as such by an agreement between the commissioner and the US EPA. This designation of a discharger as major generally involves the consideration of factors relating to the significance of the discharger's impact on the environment. Those include things like the nature and quality of the pollutants that are being discharged, the character and assimilative capacity of the receiving waters, the presence of toxic pollutants in the discharge, and here's a really big one, the compliance history of the discharger. So we do take your compliance history into effect. Now it's real simple for minor. Basically, if you're not designated as a major facility, you're a minor facility. It's the only difference. All right, the last category here Under individual permits we're going to talk about is the wet weather permit. These include stormwater related permits. That is wastewater resulting from precipitation coming in contact with a substance which is either dissolved or suspended in the water. And the other section is combined sewer overflow permits. That is wastewater discharge from a combined sewer overflow or a CSO and sanitary sewers, due to the precipitation events. I would like to note here, if you're a facility with an NPDES permit, they usually have stormwater coverage and sampling built into them. So if you have an individual, especially if you have an individual industrial permit, please make sure that you are checking your stormwater coverage in there as well. All right, that concludes the different types of individual permits. Let's get into some of the different types of general permits. All right. General permits were established for categories of point sources that have common elements, such as facilities that have the same or very similar types of operations, or facilities that discharge the same type of wastes. Thus, the general permits cover multiple facilities within a very specific category. And unlike individual permits that are tailored to the individual facility, these ones are much more broad. From 1991 to 2011, IDEM utilized a permit by rule format for all NPDES general permits. The term permit by rule was used because the general permit terms and conditions were found directly in the rules. But as a result of an EPA legal review of IDEM's permit by rule program in 2011, we were found to not be in full compliance with our memorandum of agreement with the US EPA. As you might recall earlier in this presentation, I stated that in order for the Indiana to retain its primacy with the US EPA, the US EPA has the right to review and comment on all of our rules adopted by the state of Indiana pertaining to the NPDES program. So in order to come back into compliance with our memorandum of agreement, IDEM had to change its methods of administering the NPDES general permits program. So we did this in part by changing from the permit by rule format to an administrative format using the EPA terminology called master general permits. These permits are renewed and going to be reevaluated on a 5-year interval. The general permit program provides for a streamlined permitting process. It enables the permitting authority, IDEM, to spend fewer resources and provide timeliness permit coverage. In addition, the general permits program helps to ensure the consistency of permit conditions for all similar facilities. Indiana has established a number of general permits. Here's a list of permits and their rule citations and the type of activities that are allowed by each one. Let's start with 327 IEC 15-5. That is stormwater associated with construction activity. If you're going to be disturbing any more than 1 acre, so 1 acre or more during a construction activity, you're going to have to apply for a Rule 5 permit. That's what it's often referred to. 15-5 is called a Rule 5 permit. And that's if you're disturbing land 1 acre or more. 327 IEC 15-6, we often call this one the Rule 6 permit. That is stormwater discharge associated with industrial activity. So you may not necessarily have an NPDES permit for anything inside your facility, but if you are storing any types of finished or unfinished products outside, and stormwater has the ability to wash over them, go down a storm drain and straight into waters of the state, you're going to need a Rule 6 permit. 327 IEC 15-7 is a permit for facilities engaged in coal mining, coal processing, and reclamation activities. Next one on this slide is NPDES permit number ING 250000. This is facilities discharging once through non-contact cooling water. This is if you have a big chiller or something like that you need to cool off a machine or cool off your building. You're pumping water out of a lake or a river, and you're running it through your chiller, and it goes straight back out into the same water that you took it in, it doesn't touch anything, non-contact cooling water, you're going to need this type of a permit. This is a Master General permit. It is replacing permit by rule 15-8. Here are a few more. ING 340000, wastewater discharge associated with petroleum product terminals. I think that one is pretty self-explanatory. This is replacing 327 IEC 15-9, which was repealed. The next one is ING 080000, wastewater discharge associated with groundwater petroleum remediation systems. So the previous one was that if you're at the terminal, this one's for remediating those areas. This replaced 327 IEC 15-10. See permit number ING 670000, wastewater discharge associated with hydrostatic testing of commercial pipelines. If you're doing any of that type of testing, you're going to need this type of Master General permit. This is replacing 15-11. Next one is 490000, facilities engaged in sand, gravel, dimension stone, and crushed stone operations. This is replacing 327 IEC 15-12. Last one on here is 327 IEC 15-13. This is often called Rule 13 permit, and that is stormwater runoff associated with municipal separate storm sewer conveyances or your MS4 program. So all your MS4 programs are housed under this Rule 13. IDEM did add a new general permit for temporary discharging of wastewaters, and that is ING 420000, not pictured here. That has been around about a year now. The purpose of this general permit is to regulate discharges resulting from temporary activities, and that is defined as lasting less than 1 year. Occasionally, entities or facilities need to discharge wastewaters for a limited time. These projects, which are characterized as short-term or temporary discharges, may be associated with some type of a facility or site cleanup, or an emergency discharge due to unusual or short-term circumstances, or a discharge associated with a pilot project or a test facility. So if you fall into any one of those categories, you may want to look into that Master General Permit. Again, that's ING 420000. All right, up next we have, all right, that completes the different types of permits. Next, we're going to talk about some of the major components that make up your permit. Those components include cover page, the treatment facility description and classification, effluent limitations, monitoring and reporting requirements, and standard conditions. Let's go over each one of these. The cover page typically contains the following information: the name of the permit holder, that's often called a permittee, and the identification of the facility, their point source discharges. Those are also called outfalls, again, remember. So this identifies all the point sources to which the permit applies to. You're going to have to identify the receiving waters, and it also has the conditional authorization for the discharge from the specific outfalls. So this is where your effluent can go out of to the specified receiving waters. And it's also going to have on there the effective date and the expiration on there. The next part of your permit is going to have your effluent limitations. Effluent limitations are the primary mechanism for controlling discharges of the pollutants to the receiving waters. Effluent limitations are restrictions on the quantity, discharge rate, or concentration of the pollutants discharged from your outfalls to the waters. Effluent limitations can be either water quality based or technology based. Water quality based effluent limitations are established to ensure that discharges do not cause violations of the state's water quality standards. Those water quality standards were established to protect human health and aquatic life. And Indiana, the state water quality standards, like I mentioned earlier, are set forth in 327 IEC 2-1. Now, if you're in a special area of the state, like I am here in Lake County, we do have specific water quality standards, and that is the same for any anybody that's in the Great Lake Basin. So if you are in the Great Lakes Basin, doesn't matter which Great Lake you are in here in Indiana, though you have different water quality standards. That can be found in 327 IEC 2-1.5. We'll keep that in mind, so it depends on where you are, where your water quality standards are. All right, technology-based effluent limitations, that reflects the minimum level of pollutant treatment and or control that must be achieved for the different categories of discharges. Generally speaking, for conventional pollutants, technology-based effluent limitations must reflect the use of best conventional control technology, or BCT. Toxic and non-conventional pollutants, like we talked about earlier, that technology-based effluent limitations are using the best available technology economically achievable, or BAT. So generally speaking, if you have a conventional pollutant, you're using BCT, and if you have toxic or non-conventional pollutants, you're using BAT. These limitations can be expressed in either narrative or numeric form, and they can also be expressed in terms of mass or concentration. All right. Next in your permit, you're going to find your monitoring and reporting requirements. These are used to evaluate wastewater treatment efficiency and to determine the compliance with your permit. The permit's going to identify the parameters that must be monitored and also the minimum monitoring frequency that you must have. The permit requires the submittal of the monitoring results to IDEM. That is done through the Central Data Exchange, or CDX. This is done on a monthly basis. The forms that you're going to fill out are the Discharge Monitoring Reports, or DMRs. You are probably also going to have to fill out an MMR, or a monthly monitoring report, for the industry, and those are for the industry, and you're going to municipals fill out MROs, or monthly reports of operations. So those are the different reports that you're going to have to fill out every month and put into the CDX. I would like to note here, however, that the NPDES program is structured as a self-monitoring program. That means that the permittee is responsible for conducting and paying for the monitoring activities required by the permit. IDEM oversees this self-monitoring program. That's through the means that include the inspection of your facilities, laboratory audits, and administering of the operator certification program. Now, IDEM can and does monitor your self-monitoring program. That includes access to your bench sheets, your QA/QC documents, and that is both for on-site and if you contract it out. So if your facility farms out its lab's needs, make sure that that lab is held to the same standards that you are in your permit, because IDEM does have the ability to inspect those labs as well. That is very important. All right, after your monitoring and reporting requirements comes some standard conditions. These are pre-established conditions that apply to all NPDES permits and delineate the legal, administrative, and procedural requirements of the permit. In Indiana, the standard conditions that apply to all NPDES permits are found in 327 IAC 5-2-8, and these conditions are incorporated into all NPDES permits, and these are going to include all of the following things: the duty to comply with the terms and conditions of the permit, the duty to apply for and obtain a new permit in order to continue to discharge beyond the expiration date of the current permit, the duty to take all reasonable steps to minimize or correct any adverse impact on the environment resulting from non-compliance with the permit, the duty to provide information to IDEM that the permittee knows or has reason to know would constitute cause for modification, or revocation and reissuance of the permit. Now, this includes things such as if you're physically altering your plant or the nature of your discharge is going to change. So if you are remodeling your plant, adding a new feature, removing a feature, or if you have a new product going through your facility and you're going to change your effluent and what's in your effluent, you need to notify IDEM and let us know, because that can either cause you to have your permit modified, or we will revoke that permit and give you a new one so that it has the new standards and conditions set forth in there for what you are doing. It's very important that before you do any of this, you have that new permit in hand. You also have the duty to provide IDEM representatives with the access to the permitted facility and to the records that must be kept under the terms and conditions of the permit. This right here, this is how IDEM gets into your facility to make sure that we are monitoring your self-monitoring requirements. We also do walkthroughs of your facility to make sure that everything is in proper working order, and this is how we do that. All right, a couple more things on standard conditions. It is the duty to maintain in good working order and efficiently operate all facilities and systems for the collection and treatment that are installed or used by the permittee and necessary for achieving compliance with the terms and conditions. So this is where we do your walkthrough and make sure that this is all good and ready. All right, this is a big one. Duty to report certain types of non-compliance within 24 hours of becoming aware of the non-compliance. This is such things as an anticipated bypass. I need you to pay really close attention here. There is also the obligation to report non-compliance that poses significant danger to human health or the environment as soon as the permit holder becomes aware of the non-complying circumstance. If you have a non-compliant circumstance or in a non-compliant discharge, this falls under the spill rule. The spill rule is going to be found in 327 IC 2-6.1. So the spill rule says that if there is imminent danger, significant danger to human health and the environment, you have to notify IDEM immediately. And if you can't do it, if you don't recognize it immediately, you still have to do it within 2 hours. So that is huge. If you have just a regular non-compliance or an upset, you have 24 hours. But if it is significant, it's got to be within that 2 hours, immediately or within 2 hours. So that is huge. Just wanted to emphasize that. Two more conditions here. The bypass prohibition and or limited conditions under which the permittee would not be subject to enforcement action by the bypass. And the last one is the upset defense applicable to certain non-compliance with technology-based effluent limitations under very limited circumstances. Okay, that kind of takes you over. We went over the NPDES program, how it got started in Indiana, a little bit of background information on it. We went over some definitions that you needed to know. We covered both the two different types of permits and what is in your permit. Now to take you home, I'm going to turn the presentation over to Heath, and he's going to tell you how to apply for your permit and what all goes into that. So here we go, Heath.
Okay, am I showing up?
Yes, we see you.
Okay, great. Thanks, Charles. I think we can all agree there's a lot of information about the permitting process, and you did a great job explaining all you did. Now, all that's left for me to tell you about is the permitting process and to highlight some of the benefits the NPDES program has afforded all of us. So, let me get my cursor in the right spot. In discussing the permit process, we'll go over some particulars of the permit application. Charles, do you have control of the slides? Thank you. That IDEM will review the application to make sure it's accurate and complete, how we may request additional information if deemed necessary. We'll prepare a draft permit and a fact sheet, which will contain justification for proposed permit conditions. Draft permits are then placed on public notice. IDEM then considers and responds to any comments received during the public notice period. And finally, after all is said and done, a final permit will be issued. For individual permits, permit applications, the owner of a facility seeking to discharge is responsible for submitting the permit application, except if the operator of a facility is not an employee of the owner. It is the operator's responsibility to submit the permit application. For example, if you're a business operating a wastewater treatment plant and you're renting the building you're operating out of, then it is not the property owner's responsibility to apply for your NPDES permit, but yours. New dischargers are required to submit permit applications at least 180 days prior to the date that discharge is expected to commence. Now, dischargers should contact IDEM Office Water Quality in advance of submitting an application to determine anti-degradation applicability and demonstration requirements. Existing permittees are also required to submit renewal applications at least 180 days prior to the date of the expiration of their existing NPDES permit. If a renewal application is timely submitted and IDEM does not make a determination on the renewal application prior to the expiration date of the existing permit, then the existing permit may be administratively extended, which means that the terms and conditions of the permit remain in effect until a decision is made on the renewal application. The type of application forms that need to be submitted vary, depending on the type of facility or the nature of the discharge for which a permit is being sought. Now, bear with me on this slide as we'll hang out on it for a minute, but I think it's important as a side note, before going through this slide's content, I mentioned that on February 12th, 2019, EPA finalized revisions to the application requirements at 40 CFR 122.21 in the final NPDES applications and program updates rule. The final rule became effective on June 12th, 2019. On and after this date, applicants for EPA-issued NPDES permits are required to meet the new application requirements. EPA has updated each of the 8 NPDES application forms to conform to the final rule and improve clarity and usability. Now, states that are authorized to administer the NPDES program, as Indiana is, might require use of EPA's application forms or might have developed their own state-specific application forms. In either case, the final NPDES applications and program updates rule provides states up to 1 year to make conforming programmatic and regulatory changes, and up to 2 years if statutory changes are needed. IDEM permitting sections are currently in the process of making appropriate changes to conform to the programmatic and statutory changes. However, as it currently stands, the following is the information you have to provide in your application. General information such as the name and address of the facility owner, and the facility certified operator. Owner-operator affidavit. Whether the owner or the operator is going to be responsible for obtaining the permit is what that means. Information regarding the use of water treatment additives. Identification of potentially affected persons. Information regarding each point source to be covered by the permit, including location, receiving stream, a description of the process contributing to the wastewater flow, the frequency of flow, and the flow rate. Information regarding production rates for any process that is subject to an effluent guideline that is calculated based on production rate. Identification of pollutants that the discharger believes to be present in the discharge, and for specified pollutants, analytical results depicting the concentrations of such pollutants. In the case of new dischargers, estimated values are required to be reported in lieu of actual analytical data. Identification of pollutants that the discharger believes to be present in the discharge, and for specified pollutants, analytical results. I'm sorry, I think I just repeated myself. Site maps, water balance diagrams, and flow diagrams. Data collected during the previous 2-year period. That would be 5 years for mercury, though. Reviewing the application for completeness and accuracy is just as it sounds. IDEM will review the application for accuracy and to make sure it has all information requested. If during the review it is found to be deemed necessary, we will request additional information. If the review proves we have all of the required information, we will prepare the draft permit and justification for proposed permit conditions. The justifications are communicated via a fact sheet for majors or a briefing memo for minors. Once you receive the draft permit, this is your chance to thoroughly review, comment, and ask questions about the permit before it becomes active. Really need to stress that you want to take advantage of that opportunity. In accordance with procedures set forth in the NPDES program rules and USP EPA guidance, generally effluent limitations are developed in the following manner. First, the permittee must identify all pollutants known or believed to be present in their discharge. Then, IDEM determines technology-based effluent limitations. In general, this is accomplished by first determining whether there are any US EPA technology-based effluent limitation guidelines applicable to the discharger. If so, those are what we'll use. If EPA guidelines don't exist, technology-based effluent limitations are developed utilizing the best professional judgment. For some pollutants that use water quality-based effluent limitations for pollutants believed to be present in the discharge in amounts that would create the reasonable potential for the discharge to violate state water quality standard. In general, water quality-based effluent limitations are established through the development of a waste load allocation, or a WLA, which quantifies the pollutant loadings that can be discharged without causing a violation of state water quality standards. The WLA takes into account characteristics of the receiving stream, such as the low flow value and water hardness at the point of the discharge. For each pollutant for which effluent limitations are needed, IDEM incorporates either the technology-based limitations or the water quality-based limitations, whichever is more stringent. It's really important to note if there's a pollutant that has both, IDEM is going to apply the more stringent. In the case of existing dischargers, the effluent limitations incorporated into the draft permit cannot be less stringent than the effluent limitations for the same pollutant contained in the existing permit, unless an anti-backsliding exception applies and applicable anti-degradation requirements are satisfied. The permit may contain a time schedule for the permittee to achieve compliance with effluent limitations that were either not included in the previous permit or are more stringent than the effluent limitations in the previous permit. This schedule of compliance is included in the permit only if it is determined that the permittee is unable to meet the limits at the time of the permit issuance. If the permit applicant is a new facility or an existing facility that is recommencing its discharge, a schedule of compliance cannot be provided. Prior to issuance, IDEM places the permit on public notice for a minimum of 30 days to receive comments from the public and the permittee. During the public notice period, any interested party, including the permittee, may request that a public hearing be held to allow those in attendance to present oral and written comments to IDEM regarding conditions of the permit. By statute, IDEM must consider and respond to all oral and written comments prior to or in conjunction with the issuance of the final permit. If permit conditions are significantly changed in response to the comments, the permit may be placed on public notice for another 30-day period with the opportunity for a public hearing. There is no limit on the number of times that a permit may need to be placed on public notice prior to issuance. After permit conditions are finalized, the permit is issued for a term not to exceed 5 years. Any affected party may appeal the permit by filing a petition for review with the Indiana Office of Environmental Adjudication within the statutory time frame. which in many cases means that the appeal must be filed within 18 days of permit issuance. The party filing the appeal may also request a stay of the contested permit terms. If a stay is granted by the environmental law judge, then the contested terms do not take effect pending the outcome of the permit appeal. Okay, that ends the discussion on individual permits. Now we'll move into discussing general permits. And if you remember earlier, Charles mentioned general permits are much easier and more streamlined process. So in order to obtain coverage under an NPDES general permit, an applicant must meet the applicability requirements for the particular general permit for which coverage is sought. Additionally, the applicant must submit a notice of intent, or what's called an NOI letter, for the specific NPDES general permit under which coverage is sought. For NPDES general permits still classified as permit by rule, the applicant must submit a notice of intent letter which contains the information required by 327 IAC 15-3, as well as the information specified by the applicable general permit rule. IDEM reviews the NOI, and if the information provided is insufficient, we will send you a notice of deficiency, which will identify what information is considered deficient. Once the applicant satisfies the deficiencies, IDEM will issue either a notice of coverage letter. This applies to a master general permit, which are the ones we spoke about earlier that begin with ING. The notice of coverage letter will delineate the applicable effluent limitations and monitoring requirements. Or a Rule 5, 6, 7, or 13 permit receives notice of sufficiency, which grants the applicant coverage under the general permit rule. IDEM public notices the issuance of final decisions regarding the notice of intent, including the issuance of a notice of coverage or notice of sufficiency, or a denial of the NOI, which is done in cases where IDEM determines that the applicant does not meet the general permit applicability requirements. For stormwater permits, IDEM does not issue public notice when each NOI is submitted. With these permits, the applicant is required to place an ad in the local newspaper, as well as contact affected persons. You are required to send proof of doing these things with your stormwater permit application. Next slide, Charles. According to EPA reference materials, the NPDES program has led to dramatic water quality improvements throughout the nation. Here are some examples of notable statistics. Prior to inception of the NPDES program, only 1/3 of our nation's waters were considered to be safe for fishing and swimming. Today, it is estimated that 2/3 of our waters are fishable and swimmable. Before the NPDES program, approximately 2.25 billion tons of soil was being deposited in our waters annually due to erosion caused by various activities. Today, the amount of soil lost due to these activities has been reduced by 1 billion tons annually. And prior to the NPDES program, wastewater treatment plants served only 85 million people. Today, nearly 80% of all households in the United States are served by municipal sewage collection systems. That's equivalent to approximately 265 million people. This concludes the NPDES portion of our presentation. Now, Charles is going to come back on to give information about the group that we work for within IDEM, the Compliance and Technical Assistance Program.
All right, thank you, Heath. All right, there I am. All right, everybody hear me all right? I'm back. All right, so the IDEM and Compliance Technical Assistance Program, or CTAP, has been around since 1995. We are confidential compliance assistance. which means that you can talk to us confidentially. Whether you have a permitting question or a regulatory question or anything specific to your facility, please feel free to reach out and contact us. We do have 9 different CTAPers here in the state of Indiana. We have 5 in the central office, and then there's 1 in each corner. I'm up here, I'm number 1, up here in the Northwest Indiana, and he's down there, he's number 4 in the Southwest Regional Office, and here's some of the information for that. We do have something really new and cool here in 2021. IDEM has launched the new Compliance and Technical Assistance online portal, and that is available through Access Indiana. This portal is a secure online system that makes it easier for businesses and organizations to request confidential compliance assistance regarding environmental regulation, compliance, and permitting. This is the new portal. All you have to do, log in to create an account. It's down here on the bottom here, if you can see, portal.idem.in.gov. It does take about 5 minutes or so to fill out your initial information, depending on how many permits and everything you have. But once you create your profile, it allows you to go in through Access Indiana and ask us any other questions that you might have on a confidential basis. You put in your zip code, and if we go back here, your zip code is related to one of these different areas. In central office, it's divided up into the 4 different regions, and the system will automatically direct you to your local CTAP agent. This is kind of what the new CTAP online portal looks like. You're going to click this button here, and you can also go through IDEM's electronic resources portal.idem.in.gov. This is a really great tool. It's a really fast and efficient system. It allows both the facility and the CTAP representative to go back and forth in real time. So if you need to, we can ask questions and get back to everybody in a timely manner. If you have a more difficult question, we can set the complexity level on our end, and it gives you an estimated time frame of when you're going to receive your answer. So we are the jack of all trades and the masters of none for the most part. So every one of us has our own technical background. So sometimes we don't always have the answer for you right away, but we will get that answer for you, and it will be correct. You are covered under confidentiality in this portal, and that confidentiality can be found in Indiana Code 1328.34. That says that I or any other CTAP representative can't go and speak to the regulatory part of IDEM. CTAP is a non-regulatory arm of the agency, so actually, if you tell us something confidentiality and we run across the room and say something to a regulatory arm, not only can we be fined and fired, but we could also face jail time. So I don't know about any of the other CTAPers, but I think most of us have kids and we'd like to see them all the time. So you don't have to worry about us breaking confidentiality. That's a little bit about that. Here is Heath's and mine. Here's our contact information. If you have a question or anything like that, here's our email address and phone numbers. And we are also available on the CTAP portal. That portal is open 24/7, 365. So if you have any questions, comments, concerns about that, we are happy to help you walk through the portal if you are having trouble at any time. So thank you guys all for listening and pay attention. We'll open it up for questions if we have any at this point.
Yes, we do have a couple questions that came in during the presentation. We have one from, make sure I have them here, Liz Dillon. She said, you mentioned a permit for recycling. Does that include fracking waters?
I don't recall a permit for recycling.
Yeah, I don't recall that either.
Are we talking like an individual permit or a general permit? Because there are several different general permits, but.
Liz, do you want to expand your question? Feel free to, okay, she's saying that maybe she misheard. Okay. Then we also have a question from John Morris. He says, does the spill rule require notification of neighboring towns and facilities?
Well, right now I know in Northwest Indiana here we have the Lake Michigan, the ER response up here. So if something big happens up on Lake Michigan, there is immediately notified all the local municipalities and those that are taking drinking water out. And they're all told immediately so that they can stop taking water out of the area and so that we can contain the spill.
I believe it pretty much applies the same in the southwest portion of the state, as we have the Ohio River to be concerned about down here.
We also have a question from John Haney. Any discussion on how the updated federal rules will affect pending Indiana permits?
The ones that we're working on right now, as far as updating, I mean, we're doing everything as timely as what we've ever done. So I don't think it'll affect it. If what he means by that is if it'll slow down the process, I wouldn't think so.
John, did you have any further explanation about what you were interested in? Benchmarking hard numerical limits is what he's saying. Any changes there?
I don't have any information on that. All I know about is that we're trying to get back in line with what EPA has updated as far as the application process and what they want in the applications. But as far as like the actual permits, I haven't seen anything on any changes there.
And we had another question. In terms of major components of a permit, does the treatment facility description and classification belong in the cover page, effluent limitation section, or is it a section of its own?
The classification?
The treatment facility description and classification.
It's been a while since I've actually looked at a permit, and I think it's different for municipal permits compared to industrial permits. In municipal permits, it was always on page 2, right above all of the parameters that had to be ran. In industrial, it often wasn't there at all. You would have to actually go to the fact sheet or the briefing memo to find what the classification of the plant was.
Okay. And I guess going back to John Haney's question, he says, do you know a possible timeline for the updated regulations? Is that towards the end of 2021?
Well, I think it was enacted in June of 2019. It said you have a year unless there's going to be particular types of updates, then you have 2 years. I'm not working in the permit section. I did speak to them while putting this presentation together, and both the municipal side and the industrial side said they are in the process of getting everything updated. But they didn't tell me a timeline if they have to meet that 1 year requirement, it would be by this coming June. If it's the 2 year, it would be June of 2022.
And Derek Stratton says, I may have missed the response on benchmarking hard limits. I had to take a quick call. What was the response?
Okay.
So
I believe what he means by that is there
in reference to the Rule 6 permit.
Oh, in reference to Rule 6.
As far as we know, they're still slowly changing over all the different like the Rule 5, 6, 7, and 13. Those are all eventually going to be Master General permits. When we were putting this presentation together, again, it's the same thing as the industrial and municipal side. permit section is working on it. They're going as fast as they can, but a lot of these are requiring some statutorial changes. So it's going to take a little bit of time for them to get through that. They didn't have an exact time that they don't have like a hard and fast deadline, like they'll be done by a certain time, but they are continuing to work on that as well.
Yes, and speaking with Randy Braun, I believe they said next year they're hopeful to have something. One of our other CTAP staff has added some additional information in the chat for those of you wanting to know more about the spill rule. So if you'll take a look at that, you can get more information from our one of our most seasoned engineers in our group, Mark Stoddard, has added some information in there for you. We also had, I think we addressed your question from our Capello. Is there going to be a new Indiana stormwater permit for industrial activity, and when? I think that was addressed by our answer just a second ago. There was another question from Angela Taylor, and she said, can you discuss how permitting works in areas that have an MS4?
I can't. I don't know a whole lot about the MS4 program. The facility I used to work at had one, and it was ran actually through the council. And everything to do with MS4 was ran up there at Town Hall. I don't know if that's how it is in all municipalities, but that's really my only experience with it. I was hands off on that one.
Yeah, most of the time, I know in MS4, especially with stormwater coverage, you get your stormwater coverage through the MS4 program itself. You don't need a separate Rule 5 or Rule 6 or anything like that. You, the facility or the permittee, go through the Rule 13 or your local MS4 program to get your stormwater coverage. You wouldn't. So even if you're in a municipality and that municipality has an MS4 program and your stormwater goes straight to waters of the state, you still get your coverage under the MS4 program, and you have to abide by their rules and regulations and not the 5 and 6. Usually theirs are more stringent than ours are. So make sure you know if you're in an MS4 area, because that area is all encompassing. So even if your waters go straight to waters of the state and you're in an MS4 program, check with them, because you still have to go through their MS4 program in order to be covered for stormwater.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, let's see. And she also followed up with a question that says, can you review the basic application requirements processes for the different types of NPDES permits, municipal, industrial, direct discharge and pretreatment, etc., and denote the differences in delegated cities? For instance, when does an applicant need to notify IDEM if they're in one of those delegated areas or in an MS4? Note this may be out of scope of this training, so no problem if you can't answer these.
Well, I can tell you if the facility is within a delegated area, that their permit would be with the town itself or the city itself, and all information that is gathered by IDEM actually is through our permit with the town, our agreement with the town. So if, for instance, you're an industry, you would have a local permit with your city or town wastewater facility. But if and then IDEM has a completely different section with just one person that goes around the entire state and goes to those delegated areas and inspects on them. While she's there, she may actually end up going to one of those facilities, one of those pretreatment facilities, and doing an inspection, and that's allowed. So but that would really be about the only time that they would have an interaction with IDEM. I do believe, though, that they may still be required to, and I'd have to check on this, but they may still be required to do some of or all of the reporting the same way.
Yeah. They do have to have a pretreatment permit as well. So that's key. And all their plans for that pretreatment permit that they're building have to be pre-approved, both by IDEM and the local municipality, so that they meet everybody's guidelines.
And then I think there was another part of her question that just was asking about the different processes depending on the different type of permit. And there are different forms, but that website that's actually up there on the questions, it goes through, there's links to every different type of treatment plant that, you know, if it's municipal or industrial, or if they're looking for a stormwater permit, that link has links to those types of things. I wouldn't be able to elaborate on every particular type of form that each plant has. There is a different application process, but again, just following that link would take you there, and then you just follow the directions on those.
Thanks. Are there any other questions or comments? Anything that you want to pick our brains about? I do want to mention that I had replied in the chat. There were several inquiries into receiving drinking water or wastewater CEUs for this training. We did not apply for those credit hours, although I am happy to follow up with our approval folks to see if we can get approval for you today. I will be sending out an email after this event to those of you who registered in the Eventbrite system, and you can indicate to me whether you'd like to be considered for those credit hours. So please check your email for that follow-up email from me. It may come through Eventbrite, so just pay attention to that. Also, these recordings this recording will be placed on the website link that I put in the chat. Yes, the initial one had a period at the end, so I replaced that link. It should work now. It is a live link. It has other E101s that have been developed. The air module is available on there. That we previously had presented in person. So you have a manual and a PowerPoint available for that. We also have a pollution prevention module that is available on that website, and a recent recording of a webinar we did last November on emergency planning, spills, and preparedness. So feel free to investigate those other trainings on that website. We do have a goal of having several more webinars this year. Our next webinar will be on February 23rd in the afternoon. It is, and you will get notice through our E101 trainings. It is about grain elevators. It's pretty specific, the air requirements for grain elevators and compliance with that as far as permitting and compliance for grain elevators. We also will have another upcoming presentation on ag-related spills. Early March, we'll have that. And then we have some other thoughts about doing some on PFAS. We are doing another one on, got a person, oh, he's doing it on in the environmental restrictive covenants. So look for that later on this year. So as we go, we will be posting these on the website and sending them out, as I said, to our E101 training list. So if you do not already receive emails from us regarding upcoming trainings, feel free to go to the website that I put in there and ask to be on our email list, and you'll get updates from us on the upcoming trainings. Any other last comments for us or questions? Thank you so much, Chuck and Heath, for your presentation today. And if you have any follow-up questions for us, we're happy to answer those. Also visit our portal on the website, and we are happy to help you out in any way that we can. Thank you so much for attending. Have a great day.